for passengers bound for Ellis Island, the gateway to America.
About 40% of the population of the country living today can trace the roots of one or more ancestors through Ellis Island. It was the single site of the largest migration in the history of mankind.
Varghese, Kimas, Minneapolis, Confino. People with old world names poised for a new life. For some, that meant a name change. And contrary to popular belief, immigrants' names were probably not changed by Ellis Island officials.
It's a myth that many families carry with them that the immigration officials at Ellis Island just change people's names. It's much more likely for that to have happened after an individual left Ellis Island and settled in this country.
Now, that's not to say that there weren't some instances here at Ellis Island that this happened, but mostly it didn't happen here. When people changed their names, it was at the point of naturalization. Once they'd been in this country for a period of years and they were becoming American citizens.
And more likely, they did it themselves for a number of reasons, one of them being national pride. For example, many Irish immigrants changed their names back to what they'd been before English rule. So Kenny would revert to the Gaelic McCann, and Connor would become O'Connor once again. But for the most part, more pragmatic reasons prompted name changes, such as if a name was difficult to pronounce or spell.
In some cases, the name was translated, so that if your name was Giovanni Chiesa, you would become John Church.
Some immigrants adopted American names found by skimming through newspapers. In 1910, there were 15 Rockefellers, 5 Carnegies, and 10 Roosevelts in the New York City directory. And they weren't all living on Fifth Avenue. In fact, many of these immigrants crowded into tenements on New York City's Lower East Side, like this one at 97 Orchard Street. Today, it's a living history museum with apartments transformed back to the time when immigrant families lived within its walls. Museum staff researched genealogical records to locate former residents who represented many ethnicities.
We did have to really kind of track these families down through census records. That's really where we started, through birth certificates, death certificates, spent a lot of time down at the municipal archives looking for families.
In the 1915 New York State Census, Fermoil found a Jewish family named Confino living at 97 Orchard. Misspelled here, Confini. The census listed Abraham as the head of the household along with wife Rachel and 6 children. Abraham and eldest son Joseph arrived in America in June 1913 on the SS d'Italia. According to the records, Rachel and the rest of the children were not on that boat. As with many immigrants, the father often arrived in America ahead of the family to find work. Fermoil turned to the city directory for clues to Abraham Confino's vocation in those early years.
We also looked through the city directory to see if we could find out more information about his business, and found that shortly after he arrived, he started a garment factory. He was making ladies' dresses in the neighborhoods.
In the files of the Immigration and Naturalization Service for 1921, Fermoil discovered the Confinos had become citizens of the United States. From that record, she found their country of origin.
The Confino family came from Kastoria, which was a part of the Ottoman Empire at the time. It's today a part of Greece.
The majority of New York's Jewish immigrants came from Eastern and Central Europe. People like the Confinos were a minority within a minority, making assimilation into a new culture even more difficult. This report card belonged to the Confino's daughter, Victoria. She was only in the 2nd grade at age 12, where she earned A's for effort and C's and B's for proficiency. Victoria's school records end after the 2nd grade. Not knowing the answer to this and other questions, museum investigators placed an ad in a local Jewish newspaper, hoping someone who knew of the family would contact them. They soon got a response from Michael Caulfield, son of Salvador Confino, Abraham and Rachel's youngest boy. Salvador had changed his name to Caulfield in 1940. Michael Caulfield was able to fill in researchers' gaps with the oral history of his family. At the age of 13, Victoria was removed from school to work in her father's factory. Fermoil also found out the reason why the Confinos came to America in the first place.
In Castoria, the family ran a grocery store. Apparently, their house and their business burned down. It was during the Balkan Wars, and the family decided to move to this country.
Caulfield's oral history also helped the museum recreate the 3 Confino rooms at 97 Orchard, all 325 square feet. Here, Victoria slept on the bed in the front room, while her 5 brothers slept on crates covered with thick Turkish mats called mantas. In the tenement, there was no heat, no hot water, no bathtub, and no shower. The toilet was in the hall. Sparse as it may sound, 97 Orchard was relatively comfortable as tenements went. And hard-working Abraham saved enough money to finally move uptown to East Harlem, an up-and-coming Jewish neighborhood at the time. In 1922, the Confinos snapped these photographs.
And in that year, they brought everything they owned in their apartment up to the roof of the building. So they had wallpaper sort of around them on the roof of the building, and tables and books and chairs and lamps and all kinds of things to take photographs of all the things that they had.
And according to some personal documents, the Confinos did well in America.
And then we find out through family letters about 1922 that he actually owns real estate on the Lower East Side. He owns buildings.
Abraham and Rachel Confino's success is also evident in their very healthy family tree. Their 8 children had 22 children, who had 40 children, who gave life to the 4th generation of Confinos in America, currently around 30. But remember Kate Fermoil's abandoned search for a record of Rachel Confino's arrival at Ellis Island? Up until recently, it has been extremely difficult to trace passenger arrivals to Ellis Island without having precise information. Facts that are not always readily available to genealogists. During Ellis Island's 62-year tenure, every ship that docked there handed over a full list of passengers, commonly called a ship's passenger manifest.
It's kind of hard to think of people as cargo, but that's really what they were, and the ship's captain had to generate these lists and present them as evidence of what he was bringing into a country.
At first, the ship's manifests offered maybe a name, port of embarkation, and destination. After 1906, when the Immigration and Naturalization Service began screening people at Ellis Island, the records became much more detailed.
It was name, your personal characteristics, your age, the color of your eyes, the color of your hair, the address of the place you come from, the place you were going to in this country. And they asked you how much money you had with you. 2 interesting questions they wanted to know is whether you were an anarchist or a polygamist, which apparently were the big questions of that day.
For people searching for immigrant roots, sifting through the thousands of passenger lists is the genealogical equivalent of finding a needle in a haystack. Because the lists were never indexed by name, you couldn't just plug in the name of the passenger and find the correct record. You needed the precise name of the ship and the exact date of its arrival at Ellis Island. Then you'd have to access the microfilm copy and visually skim through the columns of names. You might have found what you were looking for, provided the name wasn't changed or spelled differently. Kate Fermoil did stumble across a possible clue, handwritten on the back of Abraham Confino's passport. The scribble mentioned a ship, the Martha Washington, that docked in New York Harbor in August 1913. Armed with this information, she plunged into the thousands of unindexed manifests and failed to locate a match. With no other leads to narrow the search, she was finally forced to leave it. That is until January 2001, when Fermoil got a helping hand from a revolutionary new resource. Since 1996, a computer database of the ship's manifests from the heaviest years of immigration, 1892 to 1924, has been compiled by the Statue of Liberty Ellis Island Foundation, with help from website genealogy.com.
When you think of immigration, you think of Ellis Island and the nearby Statue of Liberty. The Ellis Island Foundation was doing something we thought was real exciting. So when we found that they were looking for sponsors, we definitely felt that it was a great thing to do, a great thing for all genealogists.
To create the database, the foundation turned to the world's most dedicated archivists of genealogical information, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Come, come, ye saints, come, come, labor but with joy.
Members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints have been interested in genealogical research since the 1840s.
For more than 150 years, church officials have been collecting vital records and genealogical sources for the ultimate purpose of converting people posthumously. The archives of the church are kept safe in this granite mountain on the outskirts of Salt Lake City, Utah, in a series of climate-controlled underground vaults built in the 1960s.
Inside the natural environment of this granite mountain, we're able to maintain the temperature and humidity in a relatively stable state so that we can prolong the life of those masters as long as possible.
When the archivists turned their attention to the Ellis Island ship manifests, they took meticulous care to ensure that the digital records were accurate. They transcribed each of the millions of records 3 times over, hoping the repetition might weed out human error.
The time that it took to extract these 25 million records from Ellis Island was about 4 years and involved up to about 30,000 volunteers. But when you have that all indexed, you really enable an individual to find the person they're looking for. At the touch of a key, you can make that search.
That's just what Kate Fermoil did. Using a prototype of the database and the name Rachel Confino, Kate found the correct ship's manifest in less than 30 seconds. It was the SS Argentina, not the Martha Washington, and it cruised into New York Harbor on August 30th, 1913 from Patras, Greece, a little over a month after Abraham Confino's arrival. The database of the manifests has been available online since April 2001 through a link on genealogy.com, on the Ellis Island website, and at the American Family Immigration History Center located on Ellis Island. The ship's passenger manifest database is a breakthrough for millions of Americans, shrinking an investigation that may have taken months or even years into a matter of seconds, and making Ellis Island a new starting point for genealogical research, as it was the genesis of new lives in America over a century ago. An African-American family fights to claim George Washington as an ancestor. Next on the History Channel.
Some people just seem to know where they want to go in life. And the smartest way to get there. Acura certified pre-owned vehicles. You know where you're going.
Point. Shoot. Create. The HP Pavilion 7970 with the Intel Pentium 4 processor. How will you use it? Save up to $250 by mail on the HP Digital Photography Studio.
Right, things are really shaping up. What's for lunch?
Tomato soup.
Condensed soup? That was okay when we colored with crayons. We're adults now. There's a better tasting soup.
Progresso Hardy Tomato. Big chunks of fine ripened tomatoes and special seasonings, so you get way more flavor. See the difference?
This is better.
How about your finger painting?
What? It's time to go to the better taste, the Progresso.